Hi everybody, welcome to the first hour of the City of London's Fusion3 event 2021. This is the Sydney Hour. I'd like to introduce Verity Firth to give our introduction. Over to you, Verity.
Thanks everyone, and thank you for being with us today. My name's Verity Firth. I'm the Executive Director of Social Justice at the University of Technology, Sydney. And it's my real honour to launch the Sydney Hour of the City of London Fusion3 event, which is hosted by UTS. The theme of this year's Fusion event is social mobility and inclusion, and we will be focusing today on one of the biggest exclusion and stress factors in education, assessment. In a previous life, I was the Minister for Education and Training in New South Wales. New South Wales is the largest state in Australia, and the education system governed by our state is the largest in the Southern Hemisphere. With over 2,240 publicly funded schools and a budget that at the time was a quarter of the state budget, it was and still is a massive and important portfolio. But like many education systems around the world, it grappled then and still grapples with a large gap in education outcomes determined mostly by socioeconomic status, indigeneity and geography. After leaving politics, I led the Public Education Foundation, which is an advocacy and funding foundation for public schooling in Australia. And I'm now leading the UTS Centre for Social Justice and Inclusion, which is home to our university's widening participation programs. Our university's social justice strategy commits us to increasing the number of students from equity cohorts to accessing and succeeding at university. In relation to low SES participation in particular, we've set ourselves targets of 16.5% of our students being from a low SES background by 2022. Now, we're currently sitting at around 14% of our student population coming from low SES backgrounds, and we've realised that in order to meet our strategic targets, we're going to have to do something pretty different. In my many years as both a government minister and as someone working in the not-for-profit sector and now at UTS, I see that the hurdle that stops many of our young students in their progress, and actually is a real hurdle for their progress, is the assessment regime that we impose on them, and in particular, the assessment that we impose on them in their final years of schooling. What we're hoping to do in this next hour is present to you a new approach that we're beginning to take both at UTS and in other areas. And we're hoping that you can give us feedback on this approach to assessment, because we believe it could also be relevant in business and other sectors. Now, for those who haven't ever attended an event hosted by an Australian university, in most presentation and events in Australia, we begin with an acknowledgement of country. But we're especially glad today to have an actual welcome to country. Now, welcome to country can only be performed by traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting. So I am particularly honoured to welcome Auntie Rhonda and her artist daughter Nadina Dixon to welcome us to this first hour of the final City of London Fusion event. I will now hand over to Auntie Rhonda and Nadina to welcome you to this special part of Australia. Thank you.
Warami, Garigu Nura, Walamabemi, Inyana by Alawa, Ngayanailam, Budri, Darabar Yanu. Welcome to Gadigal land. So the Sydney area around the harbour and the city of Sydney area, that is language name is Warrain, and I am a traditional descendant of the Gadigal people, also of the Bidjigal people who are around Botany Bay area, out La Perouse, also of the Darug people who are out west a bit, like around Penrith area, And also I'm an elder of the Yuin people from the far south coast of New South Wales. So I'm very honoured to be here to welcome you to country. The welcome is done to keep you safe while you're on land, on country, and on your return journey home. I'm a grandmother of 14 grandchildren, so of course I'm very interested in the education system and what's happening, and I think it's a wonderful thing that you're looking at that assessment. I'd like to also acknowledge the elders past, present and future. So of course we were the first, the Gadigal people, Bidjigal people were the first to be affected by colonisation, and so we're doing a lot of renewal and renewing our bush foods, knowledge of our bush foods, our medicines, our ceremony, our languages. So that is very, very important. That's important to our culture and our education to help the young people, the First Nations people, to be proud of who they are. And so my people are saltwater and freshwater people because the rivers flow into the ocean. And the women used to go out in the nawis, in the canoes, and they'd take the little children out in the harbour, the second deepest harbour in the world. And so they used to go out in their little canoes, the little bark canoes, nawis, and they'd have their fire on the canoe, on the clay little pit, fire pit, and they'd have the little children there with them, and they'd pull in the fish and they'd cook the fish on the boat, on the little canoe, on the nawis. So I also have the connection of my great-great-grandmother, Jenny Locke, who used to live at the boat sheds there at Circular Quay, and she's the one in the middle of the photo of, that's my dad up the top. He was a political activist, Charles Chicka Dixon, and I do a lot of, let me just finish the connection with my grandmother first. And so she used to live at Circular Quay, and she'd walk from Circular Quay over through Centennial Park and then out to La Perouse, to our people out La Perouse. So I just wanted to share that little bit of connection. The photo on your left is with myself. I do a lot of rallies and welcome people to country. And the man behind is Professor Jason Santalos, who's my supervisor. I'm doing my master's in how to work and study respectfully on Gadigal Bidjigal land and protocols. So of course I'm very passionate about social justice, and there's my daughter in the middle. So she's an artist, and she tells stories through her art. So the dingo on the left is her artwork, and on the other artwork is also my daughter's, Nadina Dixon. So if you'd like to look her up, you'll see some beautiful artwork. And so she tells the story of our connection to country and to our stories, our creation stories and our history and those sorts of things. We've been teaching at UTS through the School of Design for 4 years and with the students. So it's a wonderful inclusion for First Nations people to have the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Auntie.
Carroll.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yanu, everyone. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie Rhonda.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Auntie Rhonda. My name is Danny Carroll, and I'll start the Fusion Hour with our presentation on enhancing fusion skills within ethical contexts. And our collective presentation is on supporting skill and capability development through better assessment in education. My presentation starts talking about reframing assessment to better evidence student capabilities. And I'm speaking from 10 years experience in higher education at the University of New South Wales. where I managed assessment that tracks student achievement against business degree goals. This included mapping them against skills and capabilities as well as knowledge. So my co-presenters will extend on this and describe their experiences in a variety of contexts that show a systematic approach to reframing assessment towards learning. So our story of systematic improvement in foregrounding capabilities in assessment is supported by a digital assessment platform called Review that's underpinned by a model of learning called Capri. I should briefly add at this point that our talk today follows on and extends on a Fusion3 2020 presentation by Darryl Thompson, who's part of our panel today. So more on Capri. Capri is an acronym, and one acronym is the Capability Results Inventory. It's an overarching model or meta-category set that people can connect to different frameworks of skills inventories, dispositions, capability statements, or degree or school learning outcomes. And here's Capri. But it also stands for, quite clearly, communication, attitudes and values, practical professional skills, research and critical thinking, and innovation and creativity. So in the UNSW Business School context, we very easily mapped those 5 high-level descriptors against all of our business degrees, capabilities, skills and knowledge requirements. And in fact, here on the right side of this screen, we can see that Darryl has applied the Capri acronym to a set of fusion skills. And when we apply this to different skills and inventory sets, we find it maps quite neatly. So now we have a poll question for you. Considering your educational context, which of these Capri assessment meta-categories would be important or relevant to describing skills, capabilities, and dispositions in your contexts? And please feel free to vote over the next minute or so in this poll as I continue. Now, underscoring my presentation are 2 familiar assertions. And firstly, it is that assessment drives learning. It organises learners' focus and activity, informs their sense of what experts value, and provides a framework for how they think about learning. And connected with this is, if we as educators value learning, then assessment must balance the current requirements of certification with the equally important role of supporting and informing learning. That is, supporting learners' developments of skills and capabilities, as has been long called for by the Reframing Assessment and Assessment for Learning movements. In the Sydney Hour, the panel will give examples of how we've succeeded in joining traditional certification requirements of assessment and meaningfully reframing assessment in terms of learners' knowledge, capabilities, and skills development. And further, we'll propose that directly assessing and evidencing these kind of C21 and Fusion capabilities into assessment is a necessary step in successfully embedding these important elements of learning in curriculum and in learning. Now, the challenges in modern assessment are well documented. In fact, as Bill Lucas recently said, many others have proposed, modern assessment or mainstream assessment is in fact killing good learning. But what you'll hear today speaks in some ways to answers to these enduring problems that you can see on the screen and points to ways that evolution in assessment may happen. Now, returning to the student, from their point of view, learning and assessment is often experienced as a disconnected and incoherent set of experiences. And sometimes we provide general frameworks that hint towards how students can connect the disparate parts of their assessment and learning experiences. But generally, when we conduct assessment, it is not conducted in a way that makes explicit to the learner how the parts connect to their long-term development of capabilities. So we hope that students come up with a coherent and usable outcomes from this, but we do not really provide explicit frameworks in an ongoing and connected set of experiences right through their assessment. So my question is, have we abandoned the field? can we see a way forward to reframe assessment systematically in more learning-oriented contexts and scale up to many different educational contexts? So hopefully the Sydney story is an encouraging one. Over the past decade, we've found that the simple idea of describing assessment well and clearly against criteria that then link to graduate attributes, dispositions, skills or capabilities has been enabled in our learning contexts using review and Capri. And driven from this bottom-up approach, with criteria at the core and the basis, we have seen that traditional assessment at the lowest level can then be mapped to different skills and capabilities frameworks that are the primary goals in different institutions, with an overarching model, Capri, there as an optional reference to harmonise different skills and capability sets. And in this way, we feel that review facilitates the double duty that is required of assessment, providing for both the certification requirements while placing assessment in a much more learning-oriented context that's beneficial for both institutions, staff and students. Finally, to paraphrase John Hattie's take on the need to make learning visible, my co-presenters will describe how we've foregrounded skills and capability development to both staff and students and help them to see their assessment differently and through more learning-oriented lenses. I'd now like to turn over the screen of the presentation to Sonal Singh, Sarah Ellis and Simon Buckingham-Shum of University Academy. Thank you.
Hello, thank you everyone so much for joining us. It's great to see people from all over the globe here to hear about how we're doing assessment. Just to get you started, so we're here to talk about, I guess, an example of what assessment looks like for us in a program called the Uni Academy. As a little bit of context, the Uni is a widening participation outreach program that works with 23 equity funded high schools and over 600 students from low socioeconomic backgrounds each year. The program removes barriers and enables access to tertiary education, in part through equitable and inclusive assessment practices. Now, as shown on the journey map on screen here, the Uni Academy has kind of 4 streams of activity that students participate in over a 2-year period. First, we have students partake in a summer school, which is a 2-week intensive on-campus experience. We have them do 4 in-campus workshops, in-school mentoring, and weekly school-based academic support. Now, throughout these 2-year programs, students are tracked in order to identify their skills and to evidence their progress and learning journey. And for us, this longitudinal approach reimagines the way that we can kind of see a student's potential through the lens of skills and capability development. Now, students who complete this 2-year program tick off a number of boxes, meet our assessment requirements, are provided an offer here to study at UTS. So quite a big deal really in participating in the program. Now, as a little bit of historical context, prior to the formation of the Uni Academy, we would run standalone events such as summer school with our faculty partners. Now, these events did not have embedded developmental tracking and assessment. So what we needed to do was find a way to reimagine the program and to incorporate a shared assessment language across the different faculties. Now, what you can see on the screen here are kind of images of assessment happening across our different faculty areas in summer school. So we have students in media doing, making a short film. We have design students kind of doing fashion development, engineering doing mechatronics and robotics, and science doing chemistry experiments. And even through all this difference of assessment, we were able to harmonise it for the program by basically flipping from a traditional content focus to a focus on capability and skill development. And for us, this shared language in the program is Capri. So Capri for us is a way to integrate 21st century skills, or we can call them fusion skills, and skills that are relevant to first year tertiary transition success within an educational assessment. And it's these skills, such as things like communication and collaboration, reflection, creative problem solving, that we're monitoring and supporting the development of across the 2 years of the program and across these different disciplines. And ultimately what we receive is a really holistic picture of student achievement and development across the 2-year program. I'd like to hand over now to Simon, who's going to cover how we make these skills visible.
Thanks, Sarah. So my area of interest in this is in what we call learning analytics, which is the use of data to try and close the feedback loops to educators and students in more effective ways. And you only get coherent learning analytics if you have coherent learning designs. In other words, really well thought through activities that are generating data that we can make sense of. Next slide, please. So you can think of what we did in 3 steps. The first step, to move from a set of summer school activities that had been running for several years and doing a great job of engaging these students in the idea of coming to university, we had to move from that into something that gave us academy-wide capability tracking. So there was a process of going through the activities, working with the academics who designed them in order to ensure that they were valuing the capabilities that we wanted to nurture and cultivate, and that there were very clear criteria, and that involved subtuning and tweaking of the activities. Then we model those in Review, which is the web platform that helps us track these rigorously and scales the whole thing up, because there's a lot to keep track of. And so we map the criteria that the academics were after to Capri. In some cases, they adjusted their criteria to fit with Capri. And Review, as you've seen, and I'll show you another example, allows both students and teachers to assess the work and to think about the differences in those assessments. And then finally, because it's in the web platform, we can start to generate different views of how the student is doing or how the whole cohort is doing, both within a given activity, say run by business or science, but also how they're doing across activities. Thanks, next slide. So here's a little glimpse of the academy-wide rubric. We're just looking really at communication and collaboration here. You can see C1, 2, and 3, and then into attitudes and values. And you can see that's broken down into some generic criteria. But on the next example, you can see how that then is mapped, in this example, by the science faculty who run forensic science here at UTS. So they had created a crime scene investigation, very compelling activity for students. And you can see how C1, 2, and 3 are starting to appear there as they map towards the right. On the right-hand column there, we actually have the activity-specific realization of that value and that criterion. Okay, next slide. Now, once we've done this across the different disciplines, we can then get a view of what are the different capabilities that the different disciplines are valuing. And you can just see, without going into details, that different disciplines, perhaps not surprisingly, are putting greater emphasis on certain capabilities. But, you know, we could be looking at these pie charts and we might decide that that needs some revision or some refinement because it's not quite balanced. And the whole process of using Capri and Review is to talk back to the educator, to the learning designer, to say, is that really what you were planning to do? Is that the balance you were after? Okay, next slide, please, Sonal, thanks. Now, part of Review is to show the student the gap, if any, between how they assess themselves and how they finally, the assessment they finally got. So it's building this notion of evaluative judgment, the ability to understand what does good look like and how am I going with respect to that standard. So they might be overestimating or underestimating or bang on. Okay, thanks, next slide. And then of course the teachers get a dashboard that shows at a glance, you know, how is the given student doing? Each row is a student there. And on the next example, we get a more detailed breakdown. We get the pie chart at the top there, and you can see actually how the student's doing on the different criteria there in terms of the actual grades they've been receiving. Okay, so just to wrap up, really, in more sense than one, the idea is to allow these students colours. Happens to be the colours of the review Capri scheme here, but we really want them to show the capabilities they have that might not otherwise have come through using traditional assessments. And I'll pass it back to Sarah and Sonal now, just to wrap up the UTS case.
All right, so I'm talking about the evaluations here. The program targeted students who are from low SES backgrounds. These are students who are not on the trajectory to get an ATA, which is often used as a common indicator to provide admissions into universities. Now imagine if you're a student who is about to study and sit these exams, how frustrated, how tensed you would be. But if you are going to know 2 years well in advance that you are actually going to get an offer based on your capabilities, the amount of pressure is going to be sort of relieved from your shoulders, right? This was actually an unintended outcome for us to achieve, where we are actually noticing students giving us feedback that it has actually improved their well-being. They're actually sitting now exam stress-free. Imagine that in the final years. So here's a quote from one of the students. And then moving on from that quote, you can see that in the next slide, it is because it is holistic, it is a longitudinal representation of their achievement, it is a low stakes assessment, and it actually empowers the students to take and become agents of their own learning, that this is improving their well-being. Here's a question that we had asked in the survey about what did they get out from the Uni Academy? And a lot of those questions, if you look at a lot of the quotes, actually talk about it's allowed things to become much more easier, relieve stress about being accepted to a university. It has made them feel more secure about their future. So when we talk about assessments, when we talk about Capri framework, we often tend to forget the actual impact it can have on students if it is done really well. And here's a classic example from the Uni Academy case. Now, if you want to know more about the program, and especially the implications for the equity cohorts, we've got a journal article that has been published. I'll share the link there as well, so you can get more information around it. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, guys. That's wonderful. We'll throw straight across to Mike Saxon and Christian Hewen from Liverpool Boys High School, the Australian Government High School of the Year 2019.
So we are part of the You at Uni program with UTS, but we've also been doing a whole stack of other work with Review and Capri. So just give you a little bit of a context to kick off. So we're a low SES school in southwest of Sydney, about 40 kilometres southwest of Sydney. We're a really multicultural school. Our boys come from about 60 different cultural groups. About 95% of our boys identify from a non-English speaking background. And you can see some of our boys on the slide there. Our learning is very hands-on, very practical. So about 7 years ago, we moved to a learning style, project-based learning, inquiry-based learning. Our focus is really around choice and passion and unlocking that passion for the kids. So in 2016, we started our capabilities journey, because that's the key, as everyone has said, about unlocking student learning. Because what I'm really interested in is not how much knowledge a kid can attain at school, but what are those skills, what are those capabilities? And if we don't start to assess that and measure it, then we don't really value it or believe in those things. So 2016 we started. You've seen the model, the Capri model already. This was our one from 2018. We thought that we would add literacy and numeracy to it. We've since dumped that out. It doesn't really fit into the model. We also tried working with the ACARA Australian General Capabilities Framework, and that's where some of these items come from. It didn't work very well. We found it too broad, too messed up, just a bit of a piece of rubbish, to be honest. But the Capri model really did capture what we were talking about. What I really want to talk about today is that senior model. So in 2019, we moved to a position where we started to use Capri and Review to assess our schools in the last 2 years of school in the HSC as that part just before the kids graduate high school. So we now mark, assess, and report capabilities across the entire school. That's our sole reporting process. Okay, so we've completely flipped assessment within the school. These are the way that we've broken down the elements in Capri. If you'd stopped and look at it, you'll see there's lots of similarities with what UTS does, and that's the beauty of Capri. It gives you that overarching framework to connect everything else. So let's have a look at it a little bit deeper. So in this sample here, we're looking at our research and our critical thinking capability. Down the bottom are our two components, investigating and analysing. We have a variety of indicators, like subcategories, and as you read up, you get increasing difficulty from level 1, level 2, up to level 3. And you can see the language change, you know, from sort to organise to design. So that's our progress, that's our map. This is a work in progress. We're at the moment working on this to develop it into a 5-layer system. 3 layers isn't really sufficient to differentiate between the kids. All right, so how do we do it? Here's a sample of a drama task. And you can see here, Christine, my wonderful drama teacher, who's on the chat. If you've got any questions, throw them on there. She'll jump on and answer for you. So in this task, the boys in drama was about analysing, reasoning and communicating. You can see that we've got level 1, 2 and 3. We broke each of the levels up into subcategories. And simply what the teacher does is by looking at the piece of work, and in this context is drama for analysing, put a tick in the appropriate spot. So 2.1, you've just made it into level 2. 1.3, you really haven't quite got there. 2.2, you're kind of right in the middle of that level 2 space. The teacher then puts that into review, and there's a little graphic playing in the background here of putting it in again for drama. So you'll be able to see as we go into here, the student makes a reflective comment as part of this process, and the teacher repeats on the sliders. You can see the capabilities on the left-hand side. Teacher pops the sliders in, that's the black arrow. The blue arrow is indicating where the student has self-assessed. So you get that story about what the student believes they're at, where the teacher's at, and just as Simon was saying, we've got that ability to communicate and work out what that difference is in between them. All right. So in the HSC, in year 12, year 11 and 12, as the boys are heading towards that matriculation and a university entry, they study 6 courses. And just like Simon showed, we're able to map those courses with the different skill areas. And there's quite a lot of difference there, but they're fairly obvious. You'll see visual arts as a strong practical component, advanced mathematics a strong critical thinking component. So we're drawing the capability assessment from 6 courses and across a number, 3 or 4 assessment tasks per course. So for most students, we're looking at 20 to 22 assessment tasks and then parts within. So you see there's a lot of data from a lot of different places. And this is what we get. So the column graph here on the left-hand side is one student's report from earlier this year. And you can see where they've landed across each of the 5 capabilities. Remember, this is not a measure of who they are as an innovative person, but a measure of what they performed in the particular tasks. The diagram on the right-hand side, this is our graduate certificate. We produced this at the end of last year. We'll do it again this year, and it shows that relative skill level of every student across 2 years worth of assessment tasks, and then a story at the bottom about what that actually means. And when you compare that to an ATAR, which is one number, what does one number tell you about a student? Virtually nothing. This is a rich data source. So how do we start to use it? This is one of Simon's slides looking at that breakup of capabilities. Just want to have a look at something. Just notice health here. Look at the range of colours in health. Let's go back to Henry. Okay, Henry looks to me, I'll just flip backwards and forwards, like a bit of a perfect match for the health area. His colours are fairly close. So we're able to take the story of what you need at university in a graduate and match that with students, not with a random ATAR, but actually match capability to capability. That's what we're working on with UTS and Western Sydney University as an alternate entry. We can do this before the exams. We don't need HSC exams anymore. This can be scaled up, not just from between one school, but all schools and all universities. It's really exciting work, but there's another step. I'm assuming not everyone on here is an educator and say, well, okay, what's the connection with work? This is about schools and universities. Not so. We're working with our Liverpool Innovation Precinct, so that's got the hospital, it's got council, it's got a whole range of research centres in Liverpool, all big employers here. We're looking at how we can put an integrated health and education system together. And you'll see in this key diagram, capability curriculum sits front and centre of that work. So what do we want to explore? Just like you're doing with the fusion skills, is how the capability can be measured, can be assessed, can be used right across this local area in Liverpool here. It may or may not be exactly what we're proposing in this study. There's a lot of work to be done as we grow this, but this is a really exciting journey that changes that nature of assessment and puts the student at the centre. Everybody gets a personalised story about where their capabilities are. So that's a pretty rapid fire attempt to go through a 5 or 6 year journey at Liverpool Boys. I'm going to hand over to Daryl now, and we've been working together for 5 or 6 years, and he's the architect of this wonderful Capri. Thanks, Daryl.
Thank you, Michael. That's really good. I'm going to step back a bit now and just have a look at some of the motivation behind this whole process. I don't know if you can see that. This struck me when I was a young design teacher here. In fact, that's my first year as a design teacher in 1993. This is a motivation not just for education, but for business and government. I want to read it. It is the utmost importance that we recognize and nurture, hang on, I'm going to read that. Recognize and nurture all of the varied human intelligences. It was Howard Gardner who actually invented the term multiple intelligences. If we can mobilize the spectrum of human abilities, not only will we feel better about themselves and more competent, it's even possible they will also feel more engaged. Drink of water, excuse me. And better able to join the rest of the world community in working for the broader good. Now, Capri originated from me as Director of Teaching and Learning. Essentially, I was collecting assessment criteria, trying to categorize them, and it came out to be 5 categories. And Howard Gardner, later on, he wrote a book called 5 Minds for the Future. And those 5 Minds for the Future were very similar to the 5 categories that had emerged. And I've got to emphasize here, Carroll still, I think, is on the call. She's done a much more intense categorization of strategies and criteria. And Bill Lucas, thank you so much for your report saying we need a paradigm shift in assessment, because clearly we do. So because I was amazed that these categories kind of fell out to these 5, I became a bit obsessed with the idea of perhaps 5 is the way to go. So here's my question. Is the human actually hardwired with 5. I'm going to do something unusual here in a Zoom call. I'm going to stop talking. Being a designer, I have essentially collected eclectically some slides. I'm just going to play through them. It doesn't matter if you kind of understand what they are or disagree with what they are. I'm just going to roll through them. I'm going to switch off my sound and just almost like a meditation on 5. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed that little visual, silent, meditative process, and it's very good to be able to finish with Shakespeare. He had 5. capabilities or wits. And I think we'd all want common sense to be one of the ones that we develop in young people. And I just wanted to finish with, I guess, my ultimate obsession with 5. My partner Philippa and I decided that we would like to live in a 5-sided house. So here it is. This is our home. It's 5, every room is 5-sided, so you cannot say in this house within these 4 walls. And so thank you for visiting 5. And I would love to get some feedback. If you can think of any other 5s, please put it in the chat. I'll hand back now to Danny, who will take a closing look at the following 5 capabilities, Capri.
So just in summary, our experience over the last several years has been one that a software platform and an approach to assessment that harmonizes and foregrounds the development of capabilities and skills has really helped us to change the experience of assessment for educators and for learners, and to put assessment in learning-oriented contexts. So it's been a great road and a long collaboration between several institutions in Sydney, University of New South Wales, University of Technology, Sydney, for several years with Liverpool Boys High School, and increasingly bringing on other partners such as Uni Academy, and also other universities in Australia. Of course, the whole program, Anne's must be very excited. I might invite her to say hello to everybody right here now, because this is the kickoff hour in a whirlwind tour.
Lovely. Thank you for such a warm welcome to Sydney. And please, everyone, if you don't want to have a further chat with Daryl and Danny, I'm sure you're all interested too, but there's also Bandung, which is a very exciting innovation center in Indonesia. And that's going to be the next port of call on our virtual global trip. And I wish I was down physically. I'm sure many of us wish we could be visiting you all in Sydney, and we hope that time and future enables us to do it. So see you later, heading off to Indonesia. Bye.
Bye, Anne.